Hear this and many more stories on Hawk Fun.
Avenger with a sawn-off shotgun. Bloody stories from the dashing 90s.
In post-Soviet times, in the 1990s, the reason for the murder of an official of one rank or another was most often his participation in the redistribution of business.
There are also frequent cases when personal hostility was the motive.
But political assassination attempts have almost disappeared.
Locksmith Vladimir Vorontsov became a political hitman unique for the late USSR, killing his ideological enemies.
He did not fulfill anyone's order, he was not at all interested in money. The history of many countries, including Europe and the United States, knows many examples of individual terror.
Russia and the USSR that replaced it were no exception.
Zhelyabov and the People's Will, who tried to overthrow the monarchy, Fanny Kaplan, who shot at Vladimir Lenin, a soldier from a dispossessed family who opened fire on a government car in Red Square in 1942, an officer of the Soviet army, dissatisfied with the policy of the party and trying to shoot the limousine in which, according to his assumption, Brezhnev was.
It is quite logical that the most significant people in the state
became the targets of all these attempts. The tragedy that happened in Kaluga in 1991 looked completely different. But first, about the main character of our story, Vladimir Vorontsov. He, unlike other Moscow boys of the post-war period, did not have to complain about life.
The father, colonel, and mother, director of the restaurant, who returned from the front, were doted on their offspring.
We can say that Volodya, at that time, skated like cheese in butter. But it was difficult to call his generation homogeneous.
Not all children from respectable families
wanted to live according to the concepts of their parents. Classes with a personal teacher in a foreign language or music, training in horseback riding did not appeal to them. But the street and courtyards with their mysterious life attracted.
More specifically, the world of crime. It is no secret that immediately after the war, the influence of criminal elements began to grow in large cities of the country.
The image of the war hero was gradually blurring, but the heroes of the gateways, telling about the easy and beautiful life of thieves, became the idols of the boys. And with all the ensuing consequences. The Sprats, under the guidance of experienced repeat offenders, huddled in gangs and gangs, went to the cause.
So, while still a kid, Vorontsov took part in the robbery of a grocery stall.
They tricked the seller into opening the doors, and when he left, he was hit on the head with a crowbar.
And it was Vorontsov who struck the blow. The teenagers worked unprofessionally, and therefore it was not difficult for the detectives to find the hijackers.
So Vladimir was in the zone for the first time. It seemed that behind the barbed wire one could think over the past, present and future 100 times, but the obstinate teenager, as they say, took a bite at the bit, moving into the cast of 10 years. This was a category of convicts who did not intend to take the path of correction, work and study too, but devoted all their time to plans of how to annoy the administration, provoking, for example, a riot. The peculiarity of juvenile zones, both in those days and today, lies in the pedagogical approach with the use of the minimum real punishment.
Therefore, in relation to the rebel Vorontsov, the leadership of the colony decided to apply for early release. As they say, out of sight, out of mind.
For the hero of our story, such a gesture of mercy did not work. Less than 7 months after his release, Vladimir found himself behind barbed wire again, this time in the adult zone for robbery, for a period of 7 years. As Vorontsov later said, it was during the serving of his term that his ideological principles were formed.
For all his troubles and humiliations, the Soviet government and its representatives in the form of government officials and the party nomenclature are to blame.
After serving his sentence, Vladimir was released.
But not for long.
The next time he went on stage for participating in a drunken brawl.
And when he was released, he learned that he, as a particularly dangerous recidivist, was not allowed to live in large cities. Only at the 101 kilometer, for example, in Kaluga, from where it was only a couple of hours by train to Moscow, where the relatives lived. During this period, a certain metamorphosis took place with Vorontsov from the side. Vladimir looked like a completely respectable citizen. He got married. After the divorce, he honestly left the apartment to his wife and child. He treated the daughter of his second wife as if he were his own. At the plant he was appreciated, a qualified and non-drinking locksmith. He did not bend his back in front of his superiors. He could release a strong word in his address during a conflict situation. Moreover, during rare gatherings after a glass of vodka, he fervently cursed the power in all its manifestations. It seems that even the arrival of Mikhail Gorbachev did not affect his ideological worldview. Vorontsov did not believe in the so-called perestroika, so he made a dagger at the factory, and also bought a hunting double-barreled gun from his hands and turned it into a blade. A little later, I began to draw up a list of officials and party nomenclatura who were supposed to answer in accordance with his concepts. True, he did not aim at the top, only his own, local ones. But so far they have been given a reprieve. Meanwhile, the positive changes promised by perestroika began to transform into political chaos. Real freedom of speech and press, the abolition of the article of the Constitution on the dominant role of the CSU led to the creation of new social and political organizations such as the Popular Front. At first, Vorontsov took an active part in various events, but very soon he decided that the newly minted leaders, apart from fiery speeches, could not offer anything concrete. And he became firmly convinced that individual terror is the only thing that can radically change the situation, so one should move from reasoning to action. The first on the list was Ivan Fomin, editor-in-chief of the Kaluga party newspaper Znamya.
So it remained unclear to the end what exactly the middle-level official had annoyed the Avenger. Before being appointed editor-in-chief, he worked as an instructor of the district committee of the CSU and head of the investigation department. But it was he who was chosen as the first victim. At the beginning of the third hour of the day on January 11, 1991, Vorontsov entered the office of the editorial office. Throwing his jacket on the sofa, he, not paying attention to the cries of the secretary, promptly entered the office and, taking out a sawn-off shotgun from the diplomat, fired 3 shots at Fomin.
The 4th bullet had to be fired in the direction of a photojournalist who looked through the door. Fortunately, his injury was not fatal. But the criminal finished off Fomin with 1 more shot at point-blank range. After that, the killer put the weapon in his briefcase and quickly left. Nobody made an attempt to detain the terrible visitor. Blind revenge is a bad advisor, but even in this situation Vorontsov understood that it was an impossible task to break into the regional committee of the CSU, where his main enemies were settled.
But the smaller fry in the person of the head or party organizer of the construction department, where he worked at the time, was in his teeth. Fortunately for those sentenced, both of them were absent from their jobs that day, so Foreman shot the chairman of the trade union committee instead. Which, however, was also listed in his execution list.
And then the fuse was gone.
The killer went to a grocery store, drank a glass of juice, and went to surrender. Even seasoned investigators were struck by the suspect's behavior. He immediately confessed what he had done and did not express the slightest remorse. On the contrary, he believed that he had acted justly, carried out the sentence passed on to the commies hated by him.
The luminaries of the domestic forensic psychiatry shook their heads.
For the first time, they had to face a paranoid personality, but aware of the committed actions based on inner conviction. At the trial, Vorontsov behaved haughtily, did not refuse his testimony, did not apologize to the relatives of the victims. With a grin, I listened to the verdict of the Kaluga Regional Court. The death penalty was execution. The killer did not appeal against the verdict. While he was on death row, he played chess with himself. Of course, the lawyer appealed to various courts.
But his client during one of the last meetings said, "Even if the justice of a socialist country has sentenced me to death, it must be alternated until the end. Let it destroy. How long is it possible to wait?"
Vorontsov had been waiting for his death for 3 years, until in 1995 the performer put a lead point in his strange biography of a criminal avenger.
Thank you for your attention. This story was specially prepared for the Hawk Fan channel.